Single dad walks into his son's school cafeteria. The first thing he hears makes him stop. Mid-step Marcus Reed had exactly 40 minutes between his last client call and his son's school assembly, and he decided to spend 20 of them driving across town so he could surprise Tyler with lunch. It wasn't a big gesture, just a father showing up, unannounced, on an ordinary Thursday. But since the divorce 2 years earlier, Marcus had learned that the small, ordinary gestures mattered more than the big ones ever had. Being there, showing up, making sure Tyler never had to wonder if his father's promises meant anything. Marcus was 44, dressed today in a cream, white suit for a lunch meeting with investors immediately after the school visit. His silver hair cut close, his presence the kind that made rooms quiet before he said a word. Not because he demanded it, but because 30 years of building one of the most respected consulting firms on the East Coast had simply worn that quality into him. Nobody at Ridgeline High School knew who Marcus Reed was. To the front office, he was just Tyler Reed's father, a name on a pickup authorization form. That was exactly how he liked it. He never wanted Tyler to be the rich kid at school, never wanted his son's friendships built on anything but who Tyler actually was. So Marcus kept a low profile, drove a plain black SUV to school events, wore ordinary clothes when he volunteered, never mentioned his company unless someone asked directly. Today, walking through the glass doors of Ridgeline High toward the cafeteria, Marcus was thinking about none of that. He was thinking about surprising his 14-year-old son with his favorite sandwich from the deli down the street, about the easy, uncomplicated joy of watching Tyler's face light up mid-lunch period. He never got the chance. The cafeteria doors were still 40 feet away when Marcus heard a woman's voice, sharp and furious, cutting clean through the low roar of 400 teenagers at lunch. "The food isn't for you." Marcus stopped walking. He rounded the corner into the cafeteria to find a scene that made his stomach drop instantly. Behind the serving line stood a cafeteria worker in her 50s. Blonde hair pulled back tight, her face red with anger, jabbing a metal serving tray in the direction of a boy, standing frozen on the other side of the counter. That boy was Tyler. His son stood completely still, shoulders hunched, a tray in his hands, his face burning with the particular kind of humiliation that only happens when every single person around you is watching and nobody is helping. Dozens of students had frozen mid-bite, phones already rising to film. The way phones always rise the instant something painful happens to somebody else. "I don't know what kind of scam you and your little friends think you're running," the woman continued, loud enough that her voice bounced off the cafeteria's high ceilings. "But I've told you 3 times now your account's not showing a valid balance. I'm not feeding kids on the house because they think they can sweet-talk me. Step aside and let the paying students through." Tyler's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but nothing came out. Marcus knew that look. It was the look Tyler got whenever he was overwhelmed and trying, with everything in him, not to cry in front of people his age. Marcus started walking again, not fast, not aggressive, just steady, deliberate steps that cut a clean path through the cafeteria toward the serving line. Students parted instinctively, the way crowds do around someone who radiates quiet authority without raising his voice. "Say that again," Marcus said, stopping directly beside his son, his voice calm but carrying an edge sharp enough that the woman's tirade stopped mid-sentence. The lunch lady, her name tag read Deborah, blinked, startled, taking in the man now standing beside the boy she'd been yelling at. Something in his stillness, in the quality of his cream white suit, in the way the room had gone almost completely silent around him, made her hesitate for the first time since Marcus had walked in. "Excuse me," she said, though the fury in her voice had already started to falter. "I said, say that again," Marcus repeated, quieter now, which somehow made it worse. "You were loud enough the first time that I heard you from the hallway, so I imagine repeating it shouldn't be a problem." "This isn't your business," Deborah said, straightening. "This is a lunch line issue. His account shows insufficient funds. I've told him the last 2 days. He's my son," Marcus said. "So it is. In fact, entirely my business." He turned slightly, looking at Tyler, whose eyes were still fixed on the floor. "Tyler, look at me. Did you do something wrong here?" Tyler shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I put money in the account this morning, Dad. I checked before I left for school. I don't understand why it's saying, I believe you, Marcus said simply. And something in Tyler's shoulders loosened, just slightly, at those 3 words. Marcus turned back to Deborah. Let's assume, for a moment, that there really is some kind of system error with his account. Is screaming at a 14-year-old in front of the entire cafeteria, humiliating him publicly, the appropriate response to a billing glitch. I have 100 kids to feed in 20 minutes, Deborah snapped, though her voice had lost most of its earlier confidence. I don't have time to gently explain every account issue one by one. You had time to yell, Marcus said evenly. You had time to point a serving tray in his face, like he was some kind of criminal. That takes just as long as saying, hey, there might be an issue, let's step aside and sort it out quietly so you're not late for class. The problem was never time. The problem was how you chose to spend it. By now, the assistant principal, alerted by a student who'd slipped out during the commotion, had arrived at the edge of the cafeteria, along with a school resource officer, both moving quickly through the crowd of students who had, by this point, fully abandoned any pretense of eating lunch. Is there a problem here? The assistant principal, a composed woman named Miss Alvarado, asked, glancing between Marcus, Tyler, and Deborah. There is, Marcus said. Though I don't think it's the one your cafeteria staff member seems to believe it is. He gestured toward Tyler. My son's meal account apparently shows insufficient funds, despite him confirming a deposit this morning. Instead of quietly resolving, that which takes about 90 seconds, on any school system I've ever seen, Miss Deborah decided to humiliate a 14-year-old in front of his entire grade. Loud enough that I heard it from the hallway before I even reached the cafeteria. Miss Alvarado's expression tightened. She turned to Deborah. Is that accurate? Deborah hesitated. There has been a pattern of kids trying to get free meals lately. I was frustrated. I might have raised my voice more than I should have. You told him the food wasn't for him, Marcus said quietly. In front of 400 students holding up phones. That's not raising your voice more than you should have. That's a decision about how much dignity you thought a 14-year-old was entitled to in a room full of his peers. The cafeteria was utterly silent now. The kind of silence that made every word land twice as hard. Miss Chandausi, Wace. Alvarado pulled up the account system on a tablet, scrolled for a moment, and sighed. There is a sync error, she said. It happened district-wide this morning. A software update didn't process overnight deposits correctly. It's affected at least a dozen accounts today. According to the alert I just got from it, she looked at Deborah, which means you were aware there might be a system issue, and chose to assume the students in front of you were lying instead. Deborah's face had gone pale. I didn't know about the district-wide issue, she said quietly. I've been dealing with kids trying to sneak meals for weeks, and I assumed. You assumed the worst about a kid standing quietly in your lunch line, Marcus said, and decided the fastest way to handle that assumption was to humiliate him in front of everyone he knows. He looked at Tyler again, at the flush, still lingering in his son's cheeks, and something in his own composure finally cracked. Just slightly, the calm control giving way to something more protective. He's 14. This is supposed to be a safe place for him to eat lunch, not a place where an adult decides he's guilty before she's even checked the facts. Miss Tawaide. Alvarado turned to the small crowd of students still watching, many with phones still raised, and asked them, firmly but not unkindly, to head back to their seats. Then she turned to Deborah. We'll need to talk about this in my office today. Deborah looked, for the first time since Marcus had walked in, genuinely shaken, not by the possibility of consequences, but by the realization of what she'd actually done, laid out plainly in front of a room full of witnesses, and a father who clearly wasn't going to let it slide. I'm sorry, she said, turning to Tyler directly, her voice smaller now than it had been all lunch period. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that, any of it. I was wrong. Tyler, still working to find his voice, managed a small nod. It's okay, he said quietly, though it wasn't. Not really, and everyone in earshot understood that. Marcus knelt slightly, bringing himself to his son's eye level, ignoring the room full of watching students entirely. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, quiet enough now that it was just for Tyler, not for a second. "You hear me?" Tyler nodded, blinking hard, the tears he'd been holding back finally slipping loose now that the crisis had passed, and it was safe to let them. The story moved through Ridgeline High faster than any assembly announcement ever could. By the end of the school day, versions of it had already reached parents' group chats, teachers' lounges, and inevitably a handful of students' social media accounts. Though Marcus quietly asked the school to have any videos taken down out of respect for Tyler's privacy, a request the administration honored immediately, Deborah was placed on a mandatory retraining program focused on student interactions, alongside a formal written apology to Tyler and his family. She kept her job. Marcus, when asked by Miss Alvarado whether he wanted her terminated, said only, "I don't need her fired. I need her to understand that kids deserve patience before judgment, especially from the adults responsible for feeding them." It wasn't mercy, exactly. It was Marcus's quiet belief that people could still learn something real from consequences, if the consequences were paired with the truth, instead of just punishment. The district's account system was fixed by that evening. Every affected student received a formal apology email and a credited meal balance, but none of that mattered as much to Tyler as the 40 seconds his father had spent standing beside him in that cafeteria, refusing to let the moment pass unanswered. That night, driving home from the investor lunch he'd barely made it to on time, Marcus glanced over at Tyler in the passenger seat, quieter than usual, staring out the window. "You okay?" Marcus asked. Tyler was quiet for a moment before answering. "I kept thinking, right before you showed up, that I was going to have to just stand there and take it," he said. "Like there was nothing I could do." "You're 14, Marcus said gently. "You're not supposed to have to handle moments like that alone. That's what I'm here for, not to fight every battle for you forever, but to make sure you know, for certain, that you never have to face something like that by yourself. Not while I'm around." Tyler nodded slowly, some of the tension from the day finally beginning to ease out of his shoulders. "Thanks for coming today," he said quietly. "I didn't even know you were stopping by." "Neither did I, really," Marcus said, smiling slightly for the first time since the cafeteria. "Guess it turned out I showed up exactly when it mattered most." The end.